In the dead of night, May 15th, 1542, the mighty Mississippi River swallowed a secret. A group of exhausted, starving men lowered a weighted shroud into the dark, swirling currents. Inside that shroud was the body of Hernando de Soto, a man who had once stood atop the riches of the Incan Empire, now reduced to a nameless corpse hidden from the very people he sought to conquer. De Soto didn't die a hero. He died a failure, haunted by the glimmer of gold that never existed. But how did one of Spain's most decorated conquistadors end up a ghost in a land that refused to be tamed? Today, we go back to 1539. This is not just a journey of exploration. It is a 4,000-mile descent into madness, deception, and the brutal birth of North American history. By 1539, Hernando de Soto was a household name in Spain. He was wealthy beyond imagination, having served as a lieutenant under Pizarro during the bloody conquest of Peru. He had seen rooms filled with gold. He had tasted ultimate power. But for a man like de Soto, enough was a foreign concept. He looked north toward the vast emerald wilderness of La Florida. Rumors swirled in the courts of Europe of another Inca empire hidden in the swamps and forests of the north. De Soto poured his entire fortune into a private army. He didn't just bring soldiers, he brought 600 men, 200 horses, a pack of bloodhounds, and, oddly enough, a massive herd of pigs to serve as a mobile larder. On May 30th, 1539, this ironclad juggernaut waded ashore near Tampa Bay. They weren't there to settle, they were there to loot. The Spanish expected a quick victory. What they found was a nightmare of geography. The southeast was a fortress of dense pine barrens, impenetrable sawgrass swamps, and waist-deep blackwater swamps. And then there were the people. Unlike the centralized empires of Mexico or Peru, the southeastern United States was a patchwork of Mississippian chiefdoms. These were sophisticated warrior cultures who lived in fortified towns atop massive earthen mounds. And they knew exactly who the Spaniards were. From the moment De Soto's boots hit the sand, he was met with a hail of flint-tipped arrows. The Spanish had the advantage of steel and horses, but the indigenous warriors had the advantage of the terrain. They used hit-and-run tactics that left the Spaniards bleeding and baffled. De Soto's response: brutality. He began a policy of capture and chain, kidnapping local chiefs to use as human shields and forcing villagers to serve as porters. He was marching through a powder keg with a lit torch. As the expedition pushed into what is now Georgia and the Carolinas, De Soto grew frustrated. Where was the gold? Where were the emerald-encrusted temples? This is where the story takes a brilliant cinematic turn. The indigenous leaders realized that the Spaniards were driven by a singular pathological greed, so they began to use that greed against them. "Oh, you want gold?" a captured chief might say, pointing toward the distant mountains. "The kingdom to the west, their warriors wear plates of yellow metal. Their cities shine like the sun. Go there." It was a brilliant strategy of misinformation. Every tribe De Soto encountered told him the gold was just over the next river, in the next valley, anywhere but here. They were passing him like a hot potato, leading the Spanish deeper and deeper into the wilderness, further from their supply lines, and into the territory of their fiercest enemies. De Soto fell for it every single time. His obsession acted as a blindfold. He pushed his men through the Appalachians, into Tennessee, and down into the heart of Alabama, driven by the ghost of a treasure that didn't exist. The turning point came in October 1540 at a fortified town called Mabila. De Soto met a giant of a man, Chief Tuscaloosa. Tuscaloosa led the Spaniards into his city, promising a feast. Instead, he led them into a trap. What followed was one of the bloodiest battles ever fought on North American soil. For 9 hours, the Spaniards fought for their lives against thousands of warriors. By sunset, the city was a charred ruin. Thousands of indigenous people lay dead, but the Spanish victory was hollow. They had lost their supplies, their clothes, and their morale. Most importantly, De Soto's secret was out. He was no god. He was just a man who could bleed. At this point, his men begged to return to the coast where ships were waiting, but De Soto, terrified of being a laughingstock in Spain, refused. He turned his back on the ocean and marched his battered army back into the woods. For 2 more years, the army of Florida wandered like ghosts. They became the first Europeans to see the Mississippi River, the father of waters. But to them, it wasn't a discovery, it was an obstacle. By 1542, Hernando de Soto was broken. A fever took hold of him. On his deathbed, he realized the magnitude of his failure. He had found no gold, he had founded no cities, he had only brought death, including his own. His men were terrified. They had spent years telling the locals that De Soto was an immortal son of the sun. If the tribes found out he was dead, they would be slaughtered. So under the cover of darkness, they performed that secret burial in the river. They told the local chiefs that De Soto had gone to heaven for a short visit and would return soon. Then they fled. Of the 600 who started, only about 300 ragged survivors eventually made it back to Spanish territory in Mexico. They were dressed in animal skins, carrying nothing but scars. The De Soto expedition changed the continent forever, but not in the way he intended. He didn't leave behind gold mines, he left behind microbes. The diseases his pigs and men carried ripped through the southeast, collapsing the Mississippian mound-building cultures before the next wave of Europeans would even arrive. De Soto's story is a haunting reminder of what happens when ambition outpaces reality. He came looking for an empire to own and ended up nothing more than a handful of silt at the bottom of the Mississippi.